Welcome to the Foundry by Forge College. If you've been following along with our Solidity and Ethereum quests, you know we are deep into advanced Solidity projects. Today, we're tackling a really crucial piece of our Advanced Composability Techniques module. The focus for this explainer, interoperability strategies for composite contracts. Basically, we're laying out a fresh engineering blueprint to figure out exactly how to connect our smart contracts safely, treating our code like a meticulously drafted architectural schematic. So here's the fundamental question we have to answer. How do isolated contracts actually talk to each other without just breaking the entire system? Look, having a perfectly secure, mathematically sound smart contract is fantastic, but if it can't communicate safely with the outside world, it's kind of like being a billionaire stranded on a deserted island with zero Wi-Fi. I mean, sure, you're perfectly safe, but you can't trade, you can't interact, and your system definitely can't grow. Now, in our previous lesson on auditing frameworks, we learned exactly how to build those secure, isolated fortresses. So what's our logical next step? Safely building the bridges between them. We are moving from auditing single, secure blocks to actually wiring them together into a fully interconnected machine. Here is our schematic for today. First, we'll look at the integration problem. Second, we'll cover 5 interoperability strategies. Third, we'll ground this with real-world vaults. Fourth, we'll deep dive into the adapter pattern. And finally, choosing the right tool.
All right, let's jump into section 1, the integration problem. Why can't we just plug and play?
Well, you really can't just plug composite contracts together and hope for the best. If you do, you risk violating what we call transaction invariants, which is really just an overly fancy way of saying you're breaking the fundamental rules of your contract. We have to validate input schemas so we don't accidentally accept garbage data. We have to handle nested call errors seamlessly without crashing the whole chain. And we absolutely have to manage our dependency edges carefully. Because if you ignore these, one tiny error will literally cascade into a massive, catastrophic system failure. Moving on to section 2, 5 interoperability strategies. Let's open up our communication toolkit. So every integration choice comes with an engineering trade-off. You've got direct interface calls, they're tightly coupled, but super simple. Then there are adapters, which offer a really safe translation layer, but yeah, they're gonna cost you some extra gas. Shared libraries give you awesome code reuse, but introduce some pretty complex storage dynamics. Event-driven strategies beautifully decouple your system, but the trade-off is you have to wait for eventual consistency. And finally, registries offer tons of flexibility, but they add indirection overhead. Let's actually contrast the two most common approaches we see out there. Direct interface calls are basically like shouting across a crowded room to someone you trust. It's incredibly fast, but if that person suddenly decides to speak a different language, you are literally out of luck. On the flip side, adapters act like a universal power converter with a built-in surge protector. So a massive power spike on one end, it's not going to blow up your precious machine on the other end. Section 3, Real-World Lending Vaults. Let's take these abstract ideas and actually apply them to Web3. Picture a standard lending vault trying to query a price oracle. If we use a direct call strategy, the vault computes the value, makes a synchronous direct call right to the oracle, and immediately enforces its collateral limits. Now, this is incredibly fast, but here is the massive red flag. If that oracle happens to have a sudden latency issue, or it temporarily reverts, your entire deposit path just crashes. Your vault essentially panics and shuts down entirely just because it is way too tightly coupled to the oracle's heartbeat. Now check out this alternative blueprint using an adapter. The whole flow changes. The vault checks the adapter first. The adapter is the one that actually reaches out to the oracle, normalizes the price, and absorbs any hiccups or bad data. The vault then safely gets a perfectly clean number and enforces its invariants. The best part? The vault doesn't even know the oracle just had a total meltdown. The adapter took the punch for us. Now, what if you want to go entirely asynchronous? You'd use event-driven orchestration. Honestly, guys, this strategy is kind of like writing a task on a sticky note, slapping it on a desk, and just hoping the intern handles it eventually. The vault emits an event, like a deposit being recorded, and just moves on. An off-chain agent has to read that note and finalize the collateralization later. It relies entirely on eventual consistency. So yes, it's highly decoupled, but it introduces a totally different kind of state management headache.
All right, section 4, the adapter pattern. Let's zoom in on our universal translator.
An adapter really has 3 main responsibilities. First up is translation. Think about converting a potentially negative number from a quirky oracle into a strictly positive number that your vault expects. Second is validation, which is literally just rejecting nonsensical, non-positive answers right at the door. And third is policy enforcement. This is absolutely crucial because it prevents the absolute heart-dropping panic of a multi-million-dollar vault accidentally liquidating everyone just because of a temporary math glitch. A huge part of that policy enforcement is what we call the safety floor. This is the absolute minimum acceptable price enforced by an adapter before a system intentionally halts. It's a hard-coded guardrail. If an oracle suddenly loses its mind and claims an asset is worth 0, the adapter immediately steps in, hits the brakes, and basically says, nope, we halt operations right now before we let that math touch the vault. In your code, this usually looks like a beautifully clean function, maybe called something like getNormalizedPrice. It pulls in the raw data, checks that safety floor, handles any weird conversions, and then passes a clean, predictable number, like a standard uint256, back to the main vault. The vault gets its number and remains blissfully ignorant of whatever chaos is happening outside its walls.
Finally, Section 5, choosing the right tool. How do we pick the right wires for our schematic?
Ultimately, it really comes down to managing your dependencies. If you hard-code your addresses, you get incredible, rock-solid stability with basically 0 moving parts for an attacker to exploit. But if you use a dynamic registry, you gain massive runtime flexibility, meaning you can govern upgrades and swap out a broken oracle instantly. The catch, though? You have to aggressively secure that registry. Otherwise, a bad actor will just point your shiny vault to a malicious oracle, and it's game over. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question to think about. If your external dependencies fail tomorrow, what does your workflow actually do? Does it crash and burn, or does it gracefully lean on an adapter and just wait out the storm? Building truly robust contracts is all about planning for the failures that are completely outside your control. Thanks so much for joining me today. Now, if you want to dive deeper into this track, run through the code yourself, and explore way more Web3 topics, you absolutely need to visit forge.college. Keep building, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next schematic.